All right, so we will begin our time together. Again, this is a recorded workshop, so we recognize that some people are not available at this time to watch, but will be able to engage the material and the content at a later time. We're grateful to have a on-the-ground organizer and Reverend Robin Murray, who I was once a colleague with at Faith in Texas, which is housed in Dallas, part of the Faith in Action movement. We are grateful because as we recognize through our speakers that it is important as social entrepreneurs that we are not just existing to meet the current needs, but to ask deeper questions, questions of why these needs occur, what is happening. And it is our task to raise uncomfortable questions, to challenge the status quo, to bring justice. And as we know, organizers are that very moving part that helps us organize for change. So we know that as social entrepreneurs, no matter what work we're doing and what arena we're doing it in, that a part of our work always must be organizing that we can create systemic change to put ourselves out of business. So there's no need for us to respond to that particular issue anymore. So now, without further ado, I'm going to allow Reverend Robin to share more about herself and engage you all through her planned workshop. Remember, if you have any questions, you can place them in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat, as well as if there's any other concerns, please let me know. Reverend Robin, thanks for being with us this morning.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a great opportunity to be able to get in a room and speak about organizing for change in communities, especially among faith communities. As Darnell has mentioned, my name is Reverend Robin Murray, and I am one of the lead organizers with Faith in Texas. And I'll share a little bit more about Faith in Texas here in a minute, but I am also an itinerant elder in the African Methodist Episcopal AME Church. And I get to have the pleasure and privilege of serving the folks in what we call sunny South Dallas in Dallas, Texas. And it's a predominantly Black and Latinx community. And so with that, I am just walking into what I believe is my purpose. And so what we're going to do is we are going to jump in and I'm going to do a quick share screen so that you all can see what I am seeing. Give me a moment to adjust for you. There you go. So if you're looking for organizing change in communities, you're in the right place. Some of the outcomes for our time together is to first look at what faith-centered or faith-based community organizing is and why it's important, as well as how God is at work to restore justice in our society, and ways that your social enterprise can be a conduit to help make changes in the communities that you serve, how to make it happen. So a little about Faith in Texas. We are a nonpartisan, multi-faith, multiracial grassroots movement, and we unite folks with similar values working to achieve economic, social, racial, and justice for people. And not just any person, all people. We're Christian, Jewish, Muslim, believers in humanity. And we are people from just very diverse backgrounds, faith, race, socioeconomic, professions, and more. And so we consider ourselves your family, friends, and neighbors. And so one of the things that is important to know about us is what our vision is. And it's often a similar vision to other community-based groups, which it's to have a world where economic, racial, and social equity enables everyone to live in complete liberation, to pursue their divine purpose and participate fully in the systems and processes that govern their lives. So I like for this to be an interactive space. And so I'm always curious to know who is in the room. And so we're going to do ice, ice, baby. We're going to have a little icebreaker. And for the icebreaker, I'm going to stop sharing my screen in a moment, but I would love to hear from you, where you're from, why you're here, and if you can share what's giving you life these days. So I will model and hopefully others will dive in. Um, Again, like I said, I feel like this is a calling for me in ministry. You know who I am and where I'm from. I'll tell you a little about my story very briefly. I'm here because when I was called into ministry, I was discerning what exactly that looked like, and I went to seminary. And in 2015, while I was in seminary, there were racial tensions on campus. And it was there for a very long time, but really came to a peak when there was going to be a blackface party by a white fraternity. And so the graduate students, myself included, spoke to and connected with the undergrads to figure out, like, what do you need? What needs to happen? And so we got energized and pumped, and I helped to lead a prayer vigil in March, and we spoke to the administrators to seek change. And then unfortunately, things kind of died down and it fell flat. And that's when I realized, man, we don't have the power we need to really impact the system. And so that led me down this road of like faith centered organizing. And so that's why I'm here today. So does anyone feel comfortable to jump in and say who you are, where you're from, why you're here, and what's giving you life? I should say what's giving me life these days are things like this, being able to be in a room with folks and talk about how can we change systems for the betterment of God's people. So anyone want to jump in? I'll give it 5. I'll give it 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, that's okay if you don't want to jump in. Dr. Everett, I see that you came on. Thank you so much.
I was hoping someone else would get
share,
there before me. Yeah, I'm Reverend Dr. Anthony Everett. Just like you, I've got my Master of Divinity with Urban Ministry certification from the Great Perkins School of Theology at Southern Methodist University. And so I know that campus well and Dallas well, and have been engaged in activism then. One of the things that was important to me was I did an internship when I was at Perkins with Interfaith Work of Justice. And, matching up faith and matching up justice just really, was always important to me. I went on to get a DMin from United Theological Seminary, and maybe you and I can talk about that later as well in person. But what gives me life is the movement that's going on right now, movement for Black lives that's going on globally. The whole focus on justice overall, that's just really extremely important to me at this point in my life. So anyway, I'm so glad to see a fellow pony person here. So blessings to you.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, pony up. And I can definitely, like you, Perkins School of Theology at Southern Methodist University really shaped a part of who I am. So thank you so much for sharing. Robert, I see you came on camera. Thank you so much. Welcome. You want to share your name, where you're from, a little of your background, why you're here, and what's giving you life?
Yeah, so I'm Robert Bushy. I use pronouns he, him, his, and I'm an ordained pastor in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. I've been serving churches for 30 years. I did my MDiv at Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, did my bachelor's at Culver Stockton College in Canton, Missouri. So I'm a 5th generation disciples. So it's a long lineage of folks in my family who've been a part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. I'm located now in Bourbonnais, Illinois, which is south of Chicago. The congregation that I've been serving for the last 10 years is my home congregation, where I found faith and was baptized and all of those good things. And after 20 years of decline, we're facing the closure of our congregation, actually. But as we close, we have a vision and a mission to begin a community-based ministry nonprofit in its place. And so we will have the exciting asset of a debt-free building and facility with great location and parking and all those things that are nice for essential services. But we're excited about that vision and that mission. I'm also a community organizer with Illinois People's Action, which is a faith-based grassroots organization in Illinois. And we just won an amazing, huge victory for climate and equity in Illinois. The governor signed a bill that we've been working on for, I don't know, 6-7 years really to get to this point. But we've been working hard on this to decarbonize our state. So definitely clean up the energy sector and help with our climate and our environment, but also to address equity in energy jobs and the sector that has been predominantly taken by white males. And so we're working on that as well. It's I think, going to be a leading legislation for the nation on looking at not only how to do clean energy, but also to address equity, which is both of those are a big part of all that I've done over the years. So glad to be with you.
Wow, thank you so much. So I'm speaking to a fellow organizer, and it's interesting. I've run into a lot of congregations who are really interested in how can we create a nonprofit that does this work. So happy to hear. For the other folks, if you want to drop in the chat, feel free to do that. But I'm going to go ahead and unless someone is just like really wanting to get in there, feel free to drop in the chat. But we're going to go ahead and move forward in the presentation. But welcome again to everyone. So let's dive in. Let's talk about what exactly is faith-centered or faith-based community organizing. In order to have a conversation about faith-based or faith-centered community organizing, you have to give credit and a shout out to this book that came out by Reverend Alexia Salvatierra and Peter Heitzel. It's called Faith-Rooted Community Organizing, Mobilizing the Church in Service to the World. And she coined the term faith-rooted community organizing. This is really important because when we started as an organization, our executive directors and organizers had the honor of being mentored for a short time by Reverend Salvatierra. If you've heard of it, great, but I want to share how she defines faith-rooted community organizing. And I'm going to stop sharing for just a second because I want you to hear the sound directly from my computer.
Faith-rooted organizing is organizing that is shaped and guided by our Christian faith in every way. So we're not borrowing the secular system of Saul Alinsky and then just modifying it. We're actually asking on every level, what does it mean to the way we do this if it's done as if God is real and Jesus is risen? But it's not only organizing that is shaped by our faith, it's organizing that is meant to enable us to contribute our unique gifts as Christians to the broader movement for justice. That there is a broader movement for justice, but if we just do the same as what everyone else does, we're not bringing the unique gifts that God has given us to give.
So from her perspective, there's so much more for faith-rooted organizing. We're not just borrowing. I love how she says we're not just borrowing the tools from Saul Alinsky, which if you are not familiar with Saul Alinsky, he effectively is considered the father, if you will, of community organizing back in the 40s with labor, did a lot of organizing and kind of shaped what social impact looked like. And so for those who are in the faith community, faith-rooted organizing, that term is deeply connected with Christianity and what it means for us as Christians to do the work. And so that's why I like to term or use faith-centered or faith-based, because typically we work with a diverse group of individuals from various backgrounds, but you have to acknowledge the deep impact that she and Peter have had in the world of organizing. And so simply put, for me and for Faith in Texas, faith-centered community organizing, it's individuals and communities of faith from all backgrounds and faith traditions mobilizing people to restore justice using our God-given gifts, shifting narratives, and impacting the systems that govern our lives. Now, for Faith in Texas, this is a small portion of some broader universal truths. The group that we work with across North Texas, many of their leaders got together in a room and said, hey, what are the universal truths that we believe as we go and do this work? And so these universal truths shape why organizing for change in communities is vital. And I personally have found that these things are inherently true across the many faith-centered organizing groups that I've worked with across the country. And so let's take a look at what some of those universal truths are that came up from our group and that I've heard across the country. So the first one is that all humans have inherent worth and dignity, and deserve to be treated with dignity, care, and respect. I mean, I think that speaks for itself. We all have this inherent worth and respect, especially as Christians, if you believe that we are created in the image of God. We believe that every person is a sacred creation worthy of that dignity. We reject and resist all forms of discrimination and prejudice and division. And likely we reject them because of many things, right? Because of faith, race, gender identity, citizenship, economic background, and so much more. We also believe that we should reject any behavior or narrative that seeks to dehumanize God's created people. Definitely want to do that as you're doing your organizing. And then, of course, the most directly impacted people should be at the center and driving the solutions. They should be the driving force to the solutions. We recognize that, unfortunately, with the hierarchical systems that we have, the toxic systems we have, they do impact all of us. However, we prioritize the voices of those who are closest to the pain by elevating them and centering them to a place where they can help guide where we go. Our sacred texts often focus on attention and accountability to those who are vulnerable, to those who are marginalized and oppressed. And so we believe, again, the most impacted by the system of suppression and oppression should position us in a way that we know how to address the needs. Additional universal truths that we believe: organizing should build power that is shared by all. Power is the ability, the capability, the strength to be able to accomplish a certain outcome. And so for us, organized collective action that shifts systems towards sharing power in an accountable way is deeply important. Having effective community organizing is what helps to build that power, and it does it by forming alliances. Separation and division is a huge way of reducing and limiting power. So how do we form alliances? Again, centering those who are deeply and most impacted by injustice, and then creating participatory and accountable systems that promote democracy, protect human rights, and ensure that everyone has a role to play in the decisions that affect their lives. And then lastly, the last two universal truths: freedom is an inalienable right. Freedom isn't an alienable. We believe that it's our responsibility as faith leaders to work within and through our faith traditions and communities to teach, to preach, to collectively seek freedom and justice for all. A person is free when they are able to exist in full liberation, to be empowered and prosper to that divinely inspired purpose in a way that doesn't bring harm to other people. And unfortunately, freedom is obstructed by unjust laws and systems. We know this, especially when it comes to racism and classism. But for us, we recognize that God is at work. And so with that, we say that God is at work to restore justice in our society. We recognize that God is a higher power, the creator, and through many of our traditions. And so God is what compels us to take a powerful and prophetic stand, powerful and prophetic action that aligns with our diverse faith community, faith and belief systems, and make sure that it's rooted in the shared values that we hold and these universal truths. And so that connection to the creator, to our higher power, brings us into a better understanding, also recognizing that we don't know everything and we don't have full understanding of our creator, but we know that our creator is working for all people to find justice and peace. So I am going to ask, of those universal truths, how do these resonate with you personally or show up in your social enterprise? Anyone want to share how some of those universal truths show up for you? And if it's helpful, I can go back and show the universal truths again. I see you, Ken, with your hand. Please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, one of the things I just commented was I heard you talking about the importance of including the voices and even giving prioritization to the voices of those that we want to serve, of those that we feel called to serve. And sometimes I run into challenges with that, with other leaders within the organization. I'll give you one example is our church, about 50% of my congregation are people living with developmental and intellectual challenges and disability diagnosis. And I challenged the board to make sure we have representation on the board from that community. Challenge the elders to make sure we have representation on the elders from that community. And I get pushback sometimes.
Yeah. So this kind of goes into what I say about how our social enterprises can affect change. One of the key things that is important is to recognize who we are right now and who we want to be, right? And where are the gaps and how do we fill in those gaps? So depending on what your ministry or organization is trying to do and how they serve, sometimes it takes a very difficult conversation to say, you know, these are the people we say we want to help, we want to serve, or these are the people that exist within our community. And so what are we saying by not allowing them to have participation in their own agency?
Well,
And I will say that I've had similar conversations with my predominantly white congregations, especially after George Floyd's murder. They had to take a hard look at like, what are we saying about who we are trying to be, and had to travel down a road of being anti-racist, not just speaking up and speaking out, but actually seeking to be intentional about finding ways to be anti-racist. So it would be a similar thing. How are you finding ways to intentionally put people forward? So I hope that's helpful, but it can be a tough conversation for sure. And another recommendation is, I'm willing to bet you're not the only one who has thought about this or feels this way. And so how do you have a conversation with folks who align with you to then have a conversation with them. Okay, I saw you off of mute, Robert. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, as we, in our situation, as we close out a 128-year-old, predominantly white congregation that is not representative of our community, and not so much just the neighborhood community, but the community at large, where we are. And as we set up the community-based nonprofit, we've been very careful to make sure that the board of the nonprofit, which has no one from the current congregation on it by design, that it is reflective of all of the various groups in our community, so that it's very representative of the community, so that this new entity that we're growing will be able to hopefully engage and serve and organize throughout the community. And so, whether that's diversity on the board based in race or ethnicity or creed or gender identity, sexual orientation, etc. We've got about everybody that I can think of, find included in this group. And so far, as they gather together, it's amazing for them to look around and say, there is no group like this in our community. We've never seen this kind of group. So that gives me great hope that the voices of all those whom we will serve in the various capacities of the nonprofit have a chance to be at the table.
Yes, absolutely. It's so important. A lot of times you have, and I've been guilty of this, gone into a space and you think like, oh, this has to be the problem, so here are some solutions to the problem. And the folks that we engage, they know their lives, they know their situations, they know their communities, they've thought about the solutions. So why not just hear it straight from their mouths directly? So this is very true what you're saying, very spot on. So let's then look at how is God at work to restore justice. And some of you may have seen this before, but we want to take a look from a Christian perspective first and have a conversation about like, what does this mean for us and what is at work in justice with God? All right, and I will flag that this is a 6-minute long video, so.
If you were a praying mantis, it would be socially acceptable to devour your mate.
And if you're a honey badger,
Uh-oh. Did that sound go away for anyone else?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
If you were a praying mantis, it would be socially acceptable to devour your mate.
and if you're a honey badger, you have no regard for other animals. You don't care.
If you're a panda with twins, it's normal to abandon one to take care of the other.
But if humans do any of these things, we would call it wrong, unfair, or unjust.
Yeah, why is that? Why do humans care so much about justice?
Well, the Bible has a fascinating response to that question. On page 1, humans are set apart from all other creatures as the image of God.
Yeah, God's representatives who rule the world by his definition of good and evil.
And this identity, it's the bedrock of the Bible's view of justice. All humans are equal before God and have the right to be treated with dignity and fairness, no matter who you are.
And that would be nice if we all did that. But we know how the world really works.
And the Bible addresses that too. It shows how we are constantly redefining good and evil to our own advantage at the expense of others.
Yeah, self-preservation. And the weaker someone is, the easier it is to take advantage of them.
And so in the biblical story, we see this happening on a personal level, but also in families, and then in communities, and in whole civilizations that create injustice especially towards the vulnerable. But the story doesn't end there. Out of this whole mess, God chose a man named Abraham to start a new kind of family. Specifically, Abraham was to teach his family to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice.
Yeah, doing righteousness, that's a Bible word I don't really use, but what comes to mind is being a good person.
But what does that even mean, being good? The biblical Hebrew word for righteousness is tzedakah, and it's more specific. It's an ethical standard that refers to right relationships between people. It's about treating others as the image of God,
With the God-given dignity they deserve.
and this word justice, it's the Hebrew word mishpat. It can refer to retributive justice.
Like if I steal something, I pay the consequences.
Exactly. Yet most often in the Bible, mishpat refers to restorative justice. It means going a step further, actually seeking out vulnerable people who are being taken advantage of and helping them.
Yeah, some people call this charity.
But mishpat involves way more. It means taking steps to advocate for the vulnerable and changing social structures to prevent injustice.
So justice and righteousness are about a radical, selfless way of life.
Yeah, and you find this idea all over the Bible. Like here in the book of Proverbs, what does it mean to bring about just righteousness?
Open your mouth for those who can't speak for themselves.
And what do these words mean for the prophets, like Jeremiah?
Rescue the disadvantaged and don't tolerate oppression or violence against the immigrant, the orphan, and the widow.
And like here, look in the book of Psalms.
The Lord God upholds justice for the oppressed, gives food to the hungry, and sets the prisoner free. But he thwarts the way of the wicked. Whoa, he thwarts the wicked?
Yeah, in Hebrew, the word wicked is rasha. It means guilty or in the wrong. It refers to someone who mistreats another human, ignoring their dignity as an image of God.
So justice and righteousness is a big deal to God.
Yes, it's what Abraham's family, the Israelites, were to be all about. They ended up as immigrant slaves being oppressed unjustly in Egypt. And so God confronted Egypt's evil, declaring them to be rasha, guilty of injustice. And so he rescued Israel. But the tragic irony of the Old Testament story is that these redeemed people went on to commit the same acts of injustice against the vulnerable. And so God sent prophets who declared Israel guilty.
But they weren't the only ones. There's injustice everywhere.
Yeah, some people actively perpetrate injustice. Others receive benefits or privileges from unjust social structures they take for granted. And sadly, history has shown that when the oppressed gain power, they often become oppressors themselves.
So we all participate in injustice, actively or passively, even unintentionally. We're all the guilty ones.
And so this is the surprising message of the biblical story. God's response to humanity's legacy of injustice is to give us a gift, the life of Jesus. He did righteousness and justice, and yet he died on behalf of the guilty. But then God declared Jesus to be the righteous one when he rose from the dead. And so now Jesus offers his life to the guilty so that they too can be declared righteous before God, not because of anything they've done, but because of what Jesus did for them.
The earliest followers of Jesus experienced this righteousness from God, not just as a new status, but as a power that changed their lives and compelled them to act in surprising new ways.
Yeah, if God declared someone righteous when they didn't deserve it, the only reasonable response is to go and seek righteousness and justice for others.
This is a radical way of life, and it's not always convenient or easy. It's courageously making other people's problems my problems.
This is what Jesus meant by loving your neighbor as yourself. It's about a lifetime commitment fueled by the words of the ancient prophet Micah. God has told you, humans, what is good, and what the Lord requires of you is to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
Hey, this is John.
All right. So I never get tired of that video. It is such a good depiction for justice and righteousness, and how God can be and ask that we be active participants in the process of justice and righteousness and seeking that out. So I'm curious for you, what stands out for you, or does anything connect with your faith values? Has anyone seen that video before by the Bible Project? I love it. So and I'll also name that I have created a toolkit, and I'll drop the link for that a little bit later, that has the resources for the things that we're viewing. But does anything stand out or resonate with you from the video? How does it connect to your faith value? Do you see some of the things that were mentioned happening in your own organizations? What are your thoughts, reactions? Well, I'll go first. For me, the thing that always stands out for me is this idea that we all benefit from injustice, whether it's intentional or unintentionally, and also seeking out the vulnerable, right? So it's not enough to expect the vulnerable to just come to us and ask, they're not just going to appear and say, hey, I have a need. We have to actually go forward and seek them out. And that does require courage. It requires patience, time. But I think that's an act of love personally to be able to do that, because if I'm willing to take those steps to seek someone out, and doing so the way that I believe, through discernment and asking God to guide me in the process, then that means that I'm showing a deep love for you, and to try to find ways to touch on and get resolution for the injustices that you may be experiencing, whether it be housing and not having affordable housing, not having access to jobs, if you're undocumented, not being able to have access to healthcare. There's so many other things. Faith in Texas is working on a divest invest for incarceration, and folks who are reentering into the system, back into our society, I should say, being able to go to the jail and bail them out and have a conversation with them when they come out, which I'll share a little bit more about that later. But that's kind of something that stands out for me. Any thoughts? If not, there's another video from a Muslim perspective. Okay.
Well, the only thing that I'd say is that the passage from Jeremiah speaks to me as well, as what I use a lot in my church is from Isaiah, especially in the first chapter, 11 through 17, where he's using action words like that. And I'll impress upon them that, God is telling the Israelites at the time, basically, I'm disgusted with your Sunday services because you're not rescuing and defending and pleading for the widow and the orphan and the oppressed and the prisoner. And so it's the actions and those proactive actions that are restorative justice, those that pleading for those who are oppressed, that defending of them, that rescuing of them, that is real justice, not just talking about it, but doing it.
Yeah. That's really good. It is the action of the process. And one thing that I will say that is as I've grown through the years in the work with that particular video, is we should be advocates for folks, especially when they're not able to. But I am a very firm believer in kind of what I spoke to earlier, which is you use the word rescue, and I've interrogated that for a while, and it always circles back to people having agency in their own lives. And so how can we help people see that for themselves, and so that they can advocate for themselves? And I think God does want that, right? I think God, it's like our own relationship, right? We could pray for the wayward child or the crazy family member, but it's really their personal relationship and connection with God that's going to get them there. So it's kind of, I see it as a similar thing. It's like your own understanding and connection with the things that are happening to you and how you're being governed. So it is 1:11. Let me see how I want to move, because there is a I think we're okay. So we had a conversation with the first mosque in the DFW Metroplex. It's the Masjid al-Islam. I'm sharing this because we are a multi-faith organization, and there are some similarities across their understanding of justice in Islam. And so we spoke with Imams Abdul Jami, is who we're going to hear from. The other person in the frame is Imam Abdullah. And so let's hear what they have to say about justice as it relates and connects to the Islamic faith. And so let's see if I can screen share, and I'm actually going to do, all right. Social justice is really important. So let's run it back just a little bit. Wanted to support you in a very major way. And so let's kick off our conversation with a few questions. We know that social justice is really important. So I'm curious, Imam Abdul Jami, how does the work of social justice actually connect with Islam, particularly the history of Islam in the Black community?
Sure. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. First of all, I'll just start by pointing out that, Muslims, we recognize a God who is just. One of his excellent attributes is al-adl, which means the one who's just or equitable, who's impartial. So we start there. This is part of the characteristic or nature or the essence of our Creator, is that he establishes justice, meaning putting things in their right place, in their right balance. He teaches us in many places throughout the Quran, in one form or another, to stand out for justice. The believers are called to uphold justice, to bear witness to God, even if it's against their own selves, even if it's against your own parents, even if it's against your own people, your own kinfolk. That's how important it is to be recognized as a person with God as your witness, that you're willing to stand up for justice, no matter who it's for, no matter who it's against. And our beloved prophet, peace be upon him, he told his companions to help your brother, support him, whether he is the oppressor or whether he's oppressed. And we see oppression as being like the opposite of justice. When things are being misconstrued, when there's an imbalance, when people are being denied fairness, etc. When the prophet said, help your brother, whether he's the oppressor or he's the oppressed. And his companions were like, we get if our brother's being oppressed to help him, but how do we help him if he's the oppressor? And he told them, if he's the oppressor, then you have an obligation to stop him from being an oppressor.
Wow, that's very.
And so with all throughout the teachings of this particular faith of Islam is this notion that as Muslims, you have a responsibility and obligation to be aware of the circumstances around you and to move it towards justice to the best of your ability. Particularly the history of the African experience or the people of African descent and their experience in this country, there has been a very strong and prolonged attack on our humanity. And this is something that has kind of expressed itself in our spirituality, whether we're Muslim or not, is that we look for a spirituality that answers our cry and our calls for justice in our lives. For a God that is going to grant us victory over our oppressors, that's going to heal our wounds, that's going to rectify our circumstances in regards to justice. And so because this is so embedded in Islam, it has been something that has been attractive to the African Americans as we have been struggling and fighting and pushing for recognition of our own human rights and civil rights in America. And so,
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. So, a lot said in that frame from Imam Abdul Jami. Any thoughts there, connections to the Christian faith?
Well, I've always seen Islam, Judaism, Christianity as being Abrahamic faiths. And so in that sense, there are a lot of similarities. He didn't mention it, but Muslims believe in Jesus Christ as prophetic office. They believe in Jesus Christ as a prophet. Christians believe in that as well. We also believe in Jesus Christ as God, but we believe in it as that there's a prophetic office. So there's a similarity in those two. And I think that what he is saying in terms of the balance is also the same thing that when we talk about justice from a Judaic standpoint, justice is balance, balancing. And I look at it less of the focus on the personal, but really on the social. I'm coming from a Wesleyan perspective. I'm a United Methodist. And so coming from that perspective, I look at it as that there's personal holiness, but there's social holiness, and there's a personal piety, but there's also social piety. And I think that when he speaks of that and he talks about the experience of Africans in this country, he's talking a wider range that transcends those faith beliefs and really speaks to the experiences that African people have had since the enslavement of Africans in this country. So that's some of the thoughts I have.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, Abrahamic faiths, we have there are a lot of things that tie and similarities that tie us. And for me, as I think about this, I'm constantly thinking about how is that represented and showing up here at Faith in Texas. He said something that I think is, so important, is to be aware. And it also makes me think about, Ken, what you brought up as a challenge or obstacle, whatever term you want to use for the situation you're in. So being aware and then moving towards justice. So how are we aware of those who we are serving and the needs that they have? Like, not our awareness from our perspective, but from their perspective. Like, what steps are we taking to figure that out? And then how are we moving towards justice? And so that for me is always the key, because if I realize that we're doing too many like internal meetings, like it's a bunch of staff in the room and we're coming up with the ideas and, oh, we should do this and, oh, we should do that. Or let's talk about funding. Hey, a grant's about to come through, and here, money usually comes with strings. So we have to do X, Y, and Z to get this money. And it's like, okay, but where are the people that we serve in the room? Is this really what we want to tie ourselves to if it's not what the people actually need? And so that's when I recognize, I'm like, we need to shift. Something's changed if we're having these internal staff meetings and making decisions, and also accepting any funding with strings that do not directly align with what we've told the people we serve need. All right, and so that leads me to talking about power. And so one of my favorite quotes of all time is this quote by Alice Walker. I'm sure you've heard it. The most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any at all. Oftentimes when we look at problems, sometimes it seems like, oh my gosh, it's so big. What are we going to do to fix this? We won't have enough impact in order to make a significant change in our community. But that's oftentimes because of one's understanding of power and the dynamic of power. And so one of the things that I often think about is, what is the power that we hold? So when you think about power, what are the things that you think of that have power? Money, Money has power. What else has power? What else do we see in the world around us that has power?
There's power in education. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Now, there's power in education.
Education, exactly. Knowledge.
Mhm.
There's also power in voting. These elected officials don't fight hard for a reason.
Mhm. Right, right.
So you have all these different, oh, Ken, were you going to jump in there?
Well, the only thing is I find myself struggling holding on to power that I want to give away,
Mhm.
but don't.
Yeah. So that takes some exploration around the why. Always asking, why am I holding on to this power? Is it that I don't trust the folks around me to do the job? Is there some control there? And I've definitely struggled with control issues. And then God smacks me and says, not literally, obviously, but God is like, hey, like, really? You think you have some control? Let me show you something. And then just everything blows up and God just has to handle it. So yeah, that's I think something that we all can relate to, Ken. Robert, I saw you come off mute. Or
Yeah, so there's definitely power in nonviolent direct action. Just a quick example of that with the bill that I was talking about at our state fair back in August. Now that COVID, well, in that moment, COVID mitigations allowed us to do a direct action because we haven't been able to do as much of that. But we took 150 people to the state fair on Governor's Day to the governor's tent and pushed him to push this forward in our state. And that's exactly what he did. Not just because 150 people were there, but the 150 people represented about 20 different organizations in a coalition that represented thousands of Illinoisans who wanted the governor to do this. And so the governor could look out and say, these people are all on my side, because he was on the side of this. But when you get pushback at the General Assembly level all the time, here he had some push on it. So there's power in the actions that we do.
yes, exactly. There is power. And so it sounds like you all had a very clear understanding of what kind of power you had and what you needed to move in order to make that change. Right. And so that is one of the things that we have to do. That's why I brought up power, is because we have to recognize what is the power that we hold and what do we need. Right. So narrative is a huge power. Being able to shape the narrative about groups of people or an issue or anything like that is powerful. And as faith leaders, we usually we do a good job of shaping narratives. And so that's a big place that the folks that I work with have power. So just being able to identify what is your power and what do you need in order to move the changes that you're seeking. And then also, again,
Robin, one other thing I was going to say that I heard in Robert's story is the power of collaboration and partnerships.
Yes. Relationships, y'all are all up in my presentation, but that's okay. It's good. Relationships are the bread and butter of change. Because I invested time to build relationships with community leaders and the people in the apartment complex behind the church. Because I've taken the time to do that, we have been in deep relationship with one another for years because of that front-loaded time and intentionality. And that will also position you when you're trying to make changes maybe to laws or policy. You start to realize how people are connected. And so when you realize how people are connected, then you start getting into spaces and rooms that you didn't even think was possible. And I call God a master orchestrator because I believe God is always working in the wings, and relationships do that. And then I will say just also it gets tough, right? And there are challenges and there are rough days. But again, leaning on our faith, knowing that our creator has the ultimate power. And so when people say no or not possible, knowing that God has the final say. And that will fuel our faith because God sees the bigger picture. And so with that, you being conduits of change, I'm going to share this last slide in a few minutes that we have, which speaks to, I mean, we've already touched on it periodically throughout the presentation, but what can you do in order to help God be at work to restore justice? Again, realize what fuels your organization. What are your core values? What culture have you created? And what is your personal and, sorry about that, collective why? So why are you in this? Okay, and always going back, because that foundation is what's going to propel you and keep you going. And it's also going to help you to know what to say yes to and what to say no to. Because when you start building those relationships, engaging people, when you start to have those wins, like was just mentioned, people are going to start knocking on your door, and you need to be able to discern what to say yes to and what to say no to. So find out what's fueling your organization, know your path. Remember the gifts that Alexia Salvatierra said. What are the gifts that you bring and that your organization brings to the community? I always say you need to have an offering. You cannot go into any community expecting to, tell me all of your pain and your story and your needs, and not giving anything in return. So for me, what that looks like is when I go into a community, I always bring something that they need. So for example, when we go bail people out, number one, we're bailing you out. Number two, we're giving you a bus ticket. Number three, we're telling you where to go to get housing. We're bringing something, we're building that relationship. So how are you doing that? And then how does your ministry or organization connect with those community needs? Okay. And then lastly, we already talked about it, making the connections. It's the bread and butter. Your relationships are the conduits that allow you to build the work, to build the power, to make the changes. And when you find ways to connect to those who are making changes in your community already, you amplify the possibilities. And what I mean by that is there's likely an organization doing community organizing work. How do you connect with them? And I will drop this link in the chat before we end our time. It is a link to the participant toolkit. I'm going to add the presentation into that document, but that will give you resources to books. I'll add some more books, but to Alexia Salvatierra's book, to organizations that you can connect with that are national, who may have local community organizing groups in your area, and then attend some meetings. So does anyone have any final thoughts, comments, questions, or concerns about the changes that need to be made in your community by your social enterprise? Any final thoughts, comments, questions, concerns? All right, well, I thank you so much for attending the Organizing Change in Communities workshop. I will drop my information into the document that I just left. Feel free to reach out to me, but thank you so much. I will pass it on.
And we thank you, Robin, for sharing with us today. And again, those of you who are applying to be a part of the cohort, if you are not already connected with local organizing in your context, we will be encouraging you strongly once you become a part of our cohort to make sure you're connected with the people on the ground who are working toward creating systemic change. So thank you for joining us and look forward to seeing you in our next session.